Steve Harvey had seen contestants give wild answers before, but when a young Indian woman in a pink sari answered a question about expensive things, the entire studio fell silent. What happened next made Steve Harvey break down in tears and do something that changed not just one family's life, but inspired millions around the world to never give up on their dreams. The Family Feud studio was alive with its typical excitement. The Jane family from California stood proudly at their podiums, while the Mitchell family from Florida prepared for battle on the opposite side. But among all the contestants, one woman stood out, not for her vibrant attire, but for the quiet determination in her eyes. Ishana Jain, 28 years old, wore a simple yet elegant pink sari that seemed to glow under the studio lights. Unlike the heavy embellishments often seen on television, her outfit was understated, just delicate silver embroidery along the border. Her jewelry was minimal: small silver earrings, a thin chain around her neck, and a simple bindi on her forehead. There was something about her presence that suggested a story waiting to be told. Steve Harvey, ever observant, noticed her immediately. "Well, hello there," Steve said warmly as he approached their side. "You look lovely in that pink. Very elegant, very classy." "Thank you, Steve," Ishana replied with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Tell me about yourself. What do you do?" Steve asked, making his usual contestant small talk. "I'm a doctor," Ishana said quietly. "I work at a community clinic in Los Angeles." "A doctor?" Steve's face lit up. "We got a doctor in the house, everybody." The audience applauded appreciatively. "Your parents must be so proud. I bet they tell everybody, 'My daughter, the doctor.'" Something flickered across Ishana's face, a complex mix of emotions that passed so quickly most people missed it. But Steve Harvey, after years of reading people, caught it. "They are proud," Ishana said simply, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the fabric of her sari. The game proceeded normally at first. The Jane family was doing well, getting answers on the board, working together as a cohesive unit. Ishana's younger brother had just scored points with his answer, and now it was her turn at the podium. Steve looked at his card and read the question with his typical enthusiasm. "All right, Dr. Ishana, we surveyed 100 people. Top 7 answers on the board. Name something that costs more than a house." The audience murmured, thinking of the obvious answers. A yacht, a private jet, maybe a private island. Steve was already preparing his expression, ready for whatever expensive luxury item might be named. Ishana stood very still for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the podium. When she looked up at Steve, her eyes held a depth of emotion that made him pause. "A daughter's medical education in India," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet studio. Steve's expression changed completely. This wasn't a funny answer. This wasn't even trying to be a game show answer. This was something else entirely. A truth so personal and profound that it changed the entire atmosphere of the room. "I'm sorry." "What was that?" Steve asked, gently, moving closer to Ishana. "A daughter's medical education in India," Ishana repeated, her voice stronger this time but trembling with emotion. "That's what costs more than a house." Steve looked at the board, then back at Ishana. He could see tears beginning to form in her eyes, and he made a decision that went against every instinct of keeping the show moving. "That's not going to be up there," Steve said softly. "But I think you need to tell us why you said that." Ishana nodded, taking a shaky breath. "Because that's what my parents paid. More than a house, more than their retirement, more than everything they had saved their entire lives." The studio was completely silent now. Even the crew members, who had seen hundreds of tapings, stopped what they were doing to listen. "Tell me," Steve said simply, his voice gentle and encouraging. Ishana looked out at the audience, then back at Steve. "I grew up in a small town in Rajasthan, India. My father was a school teacher. My mother worked as a seamstress from home. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. Just—" Steve nodded, giving her space to continue. "When I was young, I told my parents I wanted to be a doctor. In India, especially where we lived, people said things like, 'Why waste money educating a daughter? She'll just get married and leave.' But my parents, They believed in me. Ishana's voice cracked slightly, and Steve could see her family members wiping their eyes. Getting into medical school in India is incredibly competitive, Ishana continued. Hundreds of thousands of students compete for just a few thousand seats in government colleges. If you don't get into a government school, private medical colleges cost. It's almost impossible to imagine. How much? Steve asked gently. When I applied 12 years ago, private medical college fees were around 1 crore rupees. That's about $200,000 at the time, for a 5-year program. That didn't include living expenses, books, anything else. The audience gasped. Steve's eyes widened. $200,000 just for tuition? Ishana nodded. I took the entrance exam 3 times. 3 years of studying 14 hours a day. I missed getting into government medical colleges by just a few marks each time. My parents never said it, but I could see the strain. The coaching classes, the exam fees, the books, everything cost money. So what happened? Steve asked, completely absorbed in her story. After my 3rd attempt, when I missed the government seat by just 2 marks, I told my parents I would give up. I would do something else. I couldn't watch them sacrifice anymore. Ishana's tears were flowing freely now. You know what my father said? Steve shook his head, his own eyes glistening. He said, Ishana, we have lived in the same house for 30 years. We can live in it for 30 more. But your dreams, those have an expiration date. You become a doctor now, or never. The audience was audibly emotional now, many people wiping tears from their eyes. They sold our house, Ishana continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The house my grandfather built. The house where my father was born. They sold it and moved into a 2-room rental apartment. My mother sold all her jewelry, her wedding gold, everything. They emptied their retirement funds, took loans from relatives. Steve had to turn away for a moment to compose himself. When he turned back, his eyes were red. They did all that for your education? My father took a second job, tutoring students in the evenings. My mother started working double shifts, sewing clothes late into the night until her hands ached. My younger brother, who's standing right there, she pointed to her family. He was just a child, and he stopped asking for new clothes, new toys, anything. He understood without being told. Her brother, a young man now, was crying openly, nodding as his sister spoke. 5 years, Ishana said. 5 years of my parents sacrificing everything. 5 years of feeling guilty every single day. 5 years of promising myself I would make it worth it. Did you become a doctor? Steve asked, though he already knew the answer. I graduated with honors, Ishana said with a small smile. I thought that would be the end of the sacrifices. But then I realized an Indian medical degree wouldn't let me practice in America. If I wanted to work here, where I could earn enough to actually pay them back, I had to pass the USMLE exams, do residency here. More money, more sacrifices. Steve was shaking his head in amazement. How did they manage? My mother developed arthritis from all the sewing, but she kept working. My father's eyesight deteriorated from tutoring in poor light, but he kept teaching. They never complained. Never once made me feel like a burden. Every time I called crying from the stress, my mother would say, Beta, we are investing in something more valuable than property. We are investing in your mind. No one can take that away. Where are your parents now? Steve asked. Are they here? Ishana's face lit up for the first time. They're in the audience. I finally convinced them to visit me in America. It's their first time here. Where are they? Stand up, Steve called out. Let me see the parents who gave up everything for their daughter's dreams. An elderly couple in the middle section stood slowly. The man was thin, wearing a simple shirt and trousers, his glasses thick and slightly crooked. The woman beside him wore a modest salwar kameez, her hands showing the signs of years of hard work. But both of them were beaming with pride as they looked at their daughter. The entire studio erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite clapping of a game show audience. It was thunderous, emotional, Genuine appreciation for two people who embodied the very best of parenthood. Steve walked into the audience, something he rarely did during tapings. He reached the couple and, without hesitation, embraced them both. The father seemed surprised by the gesture, but returned it warmly. The mother was crying, touching Steve's face, in a blessing gesture typical of Indian mothers. "You should be so proud," Steve told them, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did, that's love. That's real love." When Steve returned to the stage, he had to take a moment to compose himself. The usual energy of Family Feud had transformed into something deeper, more meaningful. "Ashana," Steve said, returning to face her at the podium, "what happened after you became a doctor here?" "I did my residency in internal medicine," Ashana said. "Worked 100-hour weeks, sent every penny I could save back home. It took 7 years, but I bought them a house. Not as big as the one they sold, but it's theirs. No loans, no debt, just theirs." The audience applauded again, but Steve held up his hand. He could tell there was more to the story. "But that's not why you're emotional today, is it?" Steve asked perceptively. Ashana shook her head. "Last month, I took them to see the house I bought for them. My father walked through every room, touching the walls, checking the windows. When we got to the last room, he sat down on the floor and cried. I had never seen my father cry before. Never." Steve waited, letting her continue at her own pace. He said, "Ashana, I need to tell you something. When we sold our house for your education, I kept one thing. One single brick from the original house. I carried it with me every time we moved. Every time things got hard. I told myself that one day, my daughter would build us a better house with the education we gave her, and telled, right bray, with will decident, with it tell decident." Steve's hand went to his chest, feeling the weight of the moment. "He pulled out this old brick from his bag," Ashana continued, "wrapped in cloth, protected for 12 years. He placed it in the garden of the new house and said, 'Now our old home and new home are connected. The sacrifice has grown into something beautiful.'" There wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Camera operators were wiping their faces. Production assistants were openly weeping. Steve Harvey, the man known for his comedic timing and quick wit, stood silent, profoundly moved by what he was witnessing. "But here's what breaks my heart, Steve," Ashana said, her voice gaining strength. "My story isn't unique. There are thousands of parents in India right now selling their homes, their land, their life savings, just to give their daughters a chance at education. Not sons, daughters. Because they believe their daughters deserve the same opportunities." Steve nodded slowly. "And some of those daughters don't make it through medical school?" "Exactly," Ashana confirmed. "The pressure is unbearable. Some students, they can't handle watching their parents sacrifice everything. The guilt becomes too much. But my parents never let me carry that guilt alone. They shared the dream, so they shared the burden." "What do you do now?" Steve asked. "You said you work at a community clinic?" Ashana smiled. "I could work at a prestigious hospital, make 3 times what I make now. But I work at a free clinic in a neighborhood with many immigrant families. Families like mine who sacrifice everything for their children's dreams. I see mothers who remind me of my mother, fathers who remind me of my father. I treat them for free when they can't pay. It's my way of honoring what my parents did." Steve stood back, taking in the full picture of the woman before him. "You know what you are? You're not just a doctor. You're a living testament to what love and sacrifice can achieve." "My parents are the heroes of this story," Ashana insisted. "I just studied. They gave up everything." "Can I ask them something?" Steve said, looking toward her parents in the audience. "Uncle, Auntie, do you regret selling your house for her education?" Ashana's father stood up again, adjusting his glasses. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "Sir, we built a house of bricks and cement, but Ashana, she has built a house of knowledge and service. Which one do you think will last longer?" The profound wisdom in those simple words hit everyone in the studio. Steve stood speechless for a moment, then began to clap slowly. The entire audience joined in, giving this humble teacher a standing ovation for capturing a universal truth so perfectly. "Auntie, what about you?" Steve asked Ishana's mother. Her mother stood, more shy than her husband. She spoke in Hindi, and Ishana translated. She says, "When I was young, my parents said girls don't need education. I studied only till 8th grade. But I promised myself my daughter would have every opportunity I didn't have. Every stitch I sewed, every night I worked, I thought of her wearing a doctor's coat. Today, when patients call her Dr. Sahiba, I know every sacrifice was worth it." Steve turned back to Ishana. "You realize what you've done here today? You've shown every parent watching that investing in their children's education is the greatest investment they can make. And you've shown every child watching what they owe to parents who sacrifice for them. That's why I wanted to come on the show." Ishana admitted, "Not for the money, though it would help my parents, but to tell this story, to let other immigrant families know they're not alone in their struggles, to let other daughters know that their dreams are worth fighting for." Steve made a decision in that moment. "You know what? We're going to finish this game, and your family's going to win. I can feel it. But regardless of what happens, I'm making you a promise right here. Your parents' story is going to reach millions of people. Their sacrifice is going to inspire families around the world." And Steve was right. The Jane family did win the game, taking home $20,000. But the real victory came when the episode aired. The clip of Ishana's story went viral within hours. Two-number daughter's medical education began trending worldwide. Medical schools in India shared the video, using it to advocate for more affordable education. Immigrant communities across America shared their own stories of sacrifice and triumph. But the most incredible response came from an unexpected source. A group of successful Indian American doctors who had similar stories started a foundation called Houses to Hospitals, providing scholarships to talented students whose families couldn't afford medical education without extreme sacrifice. Within 6 months, they had raised over $10 million. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was a young woman from the same town in Rajasthan where Ishana grew up. Her father was a rickshaw driver, her mother a housemaid. They had been preparing to sell their small plot of land to finance her medical education. They didn't have to. Ishana was invited to present the scholarship. As she handed over the certificate, she said, "No parent should have to choose between a roof over their head and their child's dreams. This scholarship ensures you can have both." Major medical institutions began reviewing their fee structures. Some started need-based programs specifically for students from middle-class families who earned too much to qualify for poverty programs but too little to afford the steep fees. Steve Harvey had Ishana and her parents back on his talk show a year later. This time, her parents wore new clothes, looked healthier, and smiled more freely. The stress lines that had marked their faces were softer now. "How has your life changed since the show?" Steve asked. "Financially, we're stable now," Ishana's father said, his English more confident. "But more importantly, we've received thousands of letters from parents who said our story gave them hope. Teachers like me, who worry they can't provide enough for their children's dreams. They write saying, if we could do it, they can too." "And you, Ishana?" Steve asked. "How has this affected you?" "I still work at the community clinic," Ishana replied. "But now, once a month, I go back to India. We've set up free medical camps in rural areas, specifically focusing on women's health. My mother comes with me. She says it's her way of giving back." "Show them what you showed me backstage," Steve encouraged. Ishana pulled out a photograph. It showed a simple brick placed in a garden, surrounded by flowering plants. "This is the brick my father saved. We've had it framed in glass now. It sits in their garden, reminding us every day that from one small sacrifice, beautiful things can grow." Steve looked at the photo, then at the audience. "You see this? This is what love looks like. A brick. A simple brick that represents everything parents will do for their children." The audience was on their feet again, applauding not just for Ishana and her family, but for every parent who had ever sacrificed for their child's future. "I want to say something to every immigrant family watching," Ishana said, looking directly at the camera. "Your sacrifices matter. Your children see them. We carry the weight of them, yes, but we also carry the strength they give us. To every daughter whose parents were told she wasn't worth educating, prove them wrong. And to every parent wondering if the sacrifice is too much, look at my parents. They gave up a house, but gained a legacy. When people ask Ashana about the impact of her Family Feud appearance, she always returns to one particular letter. It was from a young woman in Mumbai whose parents were debating whether to support her engineering dreams. "We watched your episode as a family," the girl wrote. "When your father talked about building houses of knowledge instead of bricks, my father stood up and said, 'We're paying for engineering college.' Dr. Ashana, you didn't just tell your story, you changed mine." The Houses to Hospitals Foundation is rapidly growing, already providing scholarships and mentorship programs, connecting successful doctors with struggling students. Ashana serves on the board, ensuring that the selection process considers not just academic merit, but the family's sacrifice and the student's commitment to serving communities after graduation. Several medical schools have reached out about creating sacrifice scholarships, specifically for students whose families have given up significant assets for education. The applications will require an essay about what the family sacrificed, turning these stories of hardship into badges of honor rather than sources of shame. Steve Harvey often refers to Ashana's episode as the one that changed his perspective on the show. "We think Family Feud is about silly questions and funny answers," he says. "But sometimes, a simple question opens a door to the most profound human experiences." Ashana reminded me why I do this job. Not for the laughs, though those are great, but for the moments when we get to witness the very best of humanity. Ashana's parents have moved into their new house, and they're already turning one room into a small library with medical textbooks and journals. They've started hosting study groups for local students preparing for medical entrance exams, offering not just space, but wisdom gained from their journey. "We couldn't give our daughter money for coaching classes," her mother tells the students. "But we gave her something more valuable, the knowledge that we believed in her completely. That faith is free, but it's priceless." Ashana continues her work at the community clinic, but her influence has spread far beyond those walls. She's been invited to speak at medical schools about accessible medical education and the financial barriers that prevent talented students from entering the field. "Every time we price out a potential doctor because of their family's income," she says in these talks, "we're not just denying that student an opportunity. We're denying future patients a caregiver who understands their struggles, who speaks their language, who knows what it means to sacrifice for a better tomorrow." The ripple effects of that one Family Feud answer continue to spread. Parent groups have organized fundraisers for education. Medical schools are creating pipeline programs for students from modest backgrounds. And thousands of parents look at their children's dreams and think, "If the Janes could do it, so can we." The shift in how people view such sacrifices has been remarkable. What was once seen as extreme, or even foolish, selling a house for education, is now being recognized as the ultimate expression of parental love and faith in the next generation. Ashana still wears simple saris to important events, always choosing pink in honor of that life-changing day on Family Feud. When asked why, she smiles and says, "It reminds me that the most profound moments in life don't require elaborate decoration. Sometimes, all you need is truth, spoken simply, from the heart." Her story has become a talking point in medical school orientation programs, sparking conversations about privilege, access, and the true cost of achieving dreams in a world where education has become a luxury rather than a right. The episode aired a few months later and became one of the most viral Family Feud moments in the show's history. The clip has been viewed over 50 million times across social media platforms. Ashana received thousands of messages from families around the world who saw themselves in her story. "Dr. Jane," one message read, "My mother sold her jewelry to pay for my medical education after watching your episode. Today, I just got accepted into medical school. I wanted you to know. Your story didn't just change your life. It changed mine." Ashana still works at the community clinic in Los Angeles, treating patients who remind her of her own family's journey. Her parents visit often, and when they do, they bring the framed brick with them, a reminder of where they came from and what they overcame. The Houses to Hospitals Foundation continues to grow, awarding scholarships to students whose families face similar impossible choices. Medical schools have started reaching out to Ashana, asking her to speak at orientation programs about the real cost of medical education and the sacrifices families make. Steve Harvey keeps a photo from that taping in his dressing room. It shows Ashana standing with her parents, all three of them crying and smiling at the same time. He's said in interviews that it reminds him why he does what he does, not just to entertain, but to give people a platform to share truths that need to be heard. "That's not my story," Ashana often says when people praise her courage. "That's our story. Every parent who sacrifices, every child who succeeds, every patient who gets treated by a doctor who understands struggle. We're all part of the same story, and it's still being written." Steve Harvey was right. Sometimes the most expensive thing in the world isn't a yacht or a private jet. Sometimes it's the price parents pay to give their children wings. And sometimes, when those children soar, they lift entire communities with them. That's the legacy of a simple answer to a game show question. That's the power of truth spoken bravely. That's the mathematics of love. It always, always multiplies.